Hello and welcome to the March edition of Monthly Report, a podcast series where we discuss the main economic events of the previous month. My name is Francisco Salles and this is Connected, a podcast of Nova Economics Club.
The ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro.
Is that he were rather the poor were poorer.
This can be the most important step we could take to prevent another recession.
Hello everyone, today we are here with João Carvalho and Marques from Nova Economics Club. And from now on we will also have an invited guest from another students club. Today with us we have Martim Ramos from the Portfolio Management Club from the macro division. Today's themes will be the blockage in the Suez Canal, the escalation in the tensions between the US and Russia, and now we will be discussing the AstraZeneca suspension. The AstraZeneca jab, developed in Britain in partnership with the University of Oxford, is the most widely ordered vaccine in the world, having promised 3.6 billion doses to 110 different countries. However, the AstraZeneca vaccine has suffered some setbacks. Most recently, in March, its use in several European countries was suspended when concerns emerged after health authorities detecting a potential link between the vaccine and rare but severe cases of blood clots. Still, with many questions to be answered, from the medical perspective and political decisions to be taken, the effect on public confidence in the vaccine is already clear. In France, after the suspension of the vaccine, 61% said AstraZeneca vaccine was somewhat or very unsafe, versus 43% 2 weeks earlier. In Spain and Italy, that number more than doubled, with close to half of the population of both countries considering AstraZeneca vaccine unsafe. So, João, what does this delay mean for the vaccination plans, and do you believe that most countries can adapt to the delay? Right. So, do you think that the benefits of being cautious, in this case, trump the health and the economic costs associated to this situation?
Well, first, thank you for asking me to join you today. But I would like, before tackling the question itself, I would like to go and to create like a common idea of what happened during those 2 weeks last month. So, as we all know, many EU countries, Portugal included, suspended the usage of AstraZeneca vaccine for safety reasons. And they did it because of supposed blood clotting cases, even though there was no direct evidence between the two. Now, what we know, or if we analyze the situation real deeply, we can point 4 topics or 4 critical issues as being in the root of what happened. So first, we can think about patients and how countries behaved. So the first 4 cases appeared in Norway, and as Norway decided to stop the usage or suspend the usage during 2 weeks, basically what happened was that countries entered in a collective anxiety, in the sense that they rushed not to be standing out, not to be the ones that didn't suspend the vaccine. And then we move to a more geopolitical problem here, that is, on the one hand, the EU is really bureaucratic, in the sense that it takes a lot of time to take a decision and involves a lot of bureaucracy elements. So that impeded the EU to establish deals for vaccines as soon as they could. So the deals were established much later than the deals were established with the UK and the US. And on the other hand, we have this political issue regarding trading with UK after Brexit, that is the vaccines, these specific vaccines produced in the UK and distributed among the EU countries. And as there is problems in the distribution and conflicts of the UK, things get worse. Just for the sense of perspective here, it was during these 2 weeks that the president of the commission made those remarkable statements regarding the possibility of the EU blocking any kind of export of any vaccines produced within the EU. And just for the remark, the EU is one of the biggest producers of vaccines in the world, at least until now. Now, going back to your problem, or to your question itself, I would say that the main issue here is stock. or supply, in the sense that we are not having a constant supply of vaccines. So basically what's happening, or when we stop this vaccine, using this vaccine, what we are doing is that we are holding a valuable resource, a useful resource that might be the difference between staying the pandemic and leaving the pandemic, and we are basically stocking it and not using it. And even more than that, and again, one of the other issues with this vaccine is that this vaccine has a really bad PR situation. So people are raising suspicions because of all these, now we use it, now we don't, now we are not using it because there is some kind of evidence that we are not sure about of problems associated with the vaccine. So for the sake of making it numerical, so we understand the magnitude, in France during these 2 weeks, a survey showed that while 52% of citizens trusted the Pfizer vaccine, only 20% did believe the AstraZeneca vaccine. So this is a real issue. We are stacking a valuable product within our stores, and we're not vaccinating people, but we are not using it either. So in a sense, what happens here is that we are just creating more delay, and we are worsening the situation day by day. As the least people we vaccinate, the higher is the probability of having higher rates of infections, higher hospitalizations, in the limit higher deaths. And I would say that in the Portuguese case, the more we take to vaccinate people, the higher is the probability of entering a 4th wave that would be catastrophic both in public health and in economy in general.
Thank you a lot for your answer, João. So, Martim, also having in consideration what João said, and considering the different reactions that we have been seeing inside the European Union to the suspension of the vaccine, could this threaten the coordination and efficiency of the vaccination process in the EU?
Of course, that this is always a question, either in terms of financial terms or in health terms, efficiency versus efficacy and coordination. And in this case, I think that there are 2 different forces pushing for both sides. On the one hand, we have that if countries start to think on themselves and start to vaccinate more people, taking advantage of these delays in agreements, then they can, of course, stimulate their own demand, internal demand. But the problem is that this is a global problem. This is not a specific problem of one country. So in terms of the EU, we know that, for example, countries like Portugal that rely too much on tourism, they benefit from the economy of the whole EU to start growing again. And so the incentives are kind of also to coordinate. So this is really a difficult question, but I think that in this case, in the specific case of the vaccination, I think that the priority should be to coordinate, to have all of the countries vaccinated as soon as possible, to then start to reopen the economies and start to do what we did before the pandemics.
Can I just make a remark here? I would say that we are, in general, forgetting, and I'm not only talking about this conversation, but in general, about Africa and countries inside of it. Because I think many countries of Africa, for example, are not prepared for this competition that we are talking about, and they matter a lot for us. In our case, Portugal, we have a lot of relations with a lot of countries in Africa, and I think that is an issue because we need to think about that countries too and how they are going to compete in this whole process of vaccination.
So, but also, don't you think that you or any other of the guests, if they want to answer to this, that this coordination in some sense can also make competition less of a good thing, and competition can be a good thing if it is for the sake of vaccinating people faster? Don't you think that also this coordination can in some way make people vaccinate less or vaccinate in a slower way?
Yeah, I can answer this. Yeah, of course, that is also a concern, and that's what we have been observing. If you compare, like for example, with the U.S. and other countries, Chile, also a good example of vaccination, Israel. So they are all very much faster in terms of vaccination compared to the EU. So this has been a concern. This have been delaying the process, and I think that this is a concern. But also, if we see that countries that are like in terms of competition much ahead of us, they are not benefiting that much in terms of the economy. So yeah, I think that in terms of efficiency we are losing, but I think that for the future, if we can coordinate on this issue, and also in terms of the economic recovery, I think we will have more benefits in the future than the benefits of not coordinating in the present. So that's my view, at least.
The Suez Canal is an artificial waterway in Egypt that accounts for 12% of global trade movements, being then a crucial maritime venue for global trading. On the 23rd of March, Ever Given, a container ship, blocked the Suez Canal for almost a week. Faced with this situation, nearly 400 ships kept waiting for Ever Given's dislodgement to transit the Suez Canal, whereas others pursued the Cape of Good Hope route to diminish the backlashes of the interruption. This change in route affected the distance and also the round-trip voyage, becoming a costly and longer route. In fact, the suspension of the Suez Canal led a rise in freight rates for shipping containers from Asia to Europe and in large costs, revealing the fragility of global supply chains and opening space for other alternatives.
So, Martim, do you believe that this event in the Suez Canal, just in the middle of a pandemic that also restricted the transportation and trade, is a sign that global supply chains are too risky interconnectedness, and is, in your perspective, turning inwards the response for governments, or relying on others is not too big of a cost given the efficiency gains that global trade has brought to the world?
So, of course, that it's not the first time since the pandemics that this question is raised in terms of how globalized we are, how should we approach this subject. But first of all, let me just start by mentioning one thing, that this ship, the Ever Given, is a perfect example of globalization itself, because it is a Japanese-owned boat. It's registered in Panama, it's operated under a Taiwanese charter, and it transports cargo from China to the Netherlands. So 3 continents represented in only one boat. So this is the perfect example of globalization. But then I think the most important question that we need to think is it a one-time event, or is it something that may happen in the future again, for us to think about how dangerous is the globalization right now. And for that, I think we should go back to the fundamentals of the economics and all these kind of things. So if we look to the data, what we see is that over the last years, what we see is that the number of vessels, so the number of boats, has kept constant, more or less. But the number of containers has increased exponentially. And this implies that the weight and the number of containers that are in each ship has been increasing over time. And this really imposes very dangerous consequences to the globalized world. And this may not, at least the probability is that this is not a one-time event. This may occur in the future. And so then we need to understand why. And the explanation is really easy. This kind of companies operate with really low margins. So they need to they need to look to the economies of scale. So they need to try to reduce costs to increase the number of containers in each ship. And this will continue in the future. So going to your question more specifically, what I believe is that I don't believe that we go back to the past. I think the globalization is here to stay. What I do believe is that in terms of key products like food, medical supplies, the everyday life products, I think this will be more regionalized. So I think that, for example, in Asia we will see a regional hub, in Europe we will see another, in the US we will see another, and this will happen because if we extrapolate it for the whole trade, we can see that this will impose very high costs in terms of inflation because the input costs will increase. And if we consider that we are recovering from a crisis, this would not be feasible to do. So I don't believe that we will go back, but I do believe that some things will change. And just to finish my intervention, I think that there will be industries that will be very benefited from this. One of them would be the 3D printing. I think that this is an alternative, a very valid alternative to try to deal with this problem. Also, industrial automation will be another option to try to deal with the problem. And I think countries will have to find ways to try to mix, not to be fully reliant on these global supply chains, but try to adjust to the new era, also including climate change and all the problems that it may arise.
Okay, thank you a lot for your answer. Now, Anna, a bit in line with what Martin was saying, right? Do you believe that this event is a black swan event, or that due to the scale of international trading and due to the fast increase in the size of container ships, the industry as a whole should reassess regulation and risk management?
I think my answer is straightforward, yes. Although I can recognize that AstraZeneca failed a lot in this whole process, from the phases in the creation of the vaccine itself to the inability to supply the amounts agreed and all the issues we have talked about, I consider that this whole process was quite unfair for the company, and I'll be focusing my point on media, because I think it has a lot of impact in all people. I'm not saying that people don't have the right to have information. Of course they have, and this is a truly important matter, and that is directly related with all the individuals. But I think the media has to be more careful in transmitting the information, and only transmit things when really proved by the competent authorities, because this is still a new thing. This is a virus, and people are scared, and their rationality is a little bit biased by fear. So they have not been able to filter correctly the information and do cost and benefit analysis in terms of the risks of the vaccine and its benefits. So I think the information should be more clearly passed, and the consequences more clearly explained in terms of health, because this is a recent topic. People are afraid, people are scared, and are not thinking totally rationally about it. So, for example, the contraceptive pill has a lot of risks, and people take it a lot because it is not recent. People aren't afraid of it. So I think we need to really think about it, and the media should be more careful in transmitting information. Not to mention that there have been also other situations with other vaccines, and their name is not mentioned, and the AstraZeneca name is always mentioned, and I think that's quite unfair for the company itself. And because of all this tension, I think they will certainly rethink their position in this market, because it's their credibility and their reputation that is at stake, which, as we all know, matter a lot for their economic performance. And so I think they will certainly rethink that. There is already news that they are thinking about changing the name of the company. What they will do for sure, I don't know, but they will rethink it.
In the last month, US-Russia tensions have escalated after the following comment from President Biden.
I said, look in your eyes, and I don't think you have a soul.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin soon answered back.
Кто как обзывается, тот так и называется.
These comments came 2 weeks after Biden's administration imposed sanctions on Russia for the poisoning and imprisonment of Alexei Navalny. and while US intelligence investigates new alleged Russian misdeeds such as election interference and the SolarWinds hack. In that same week, the first in-person talks between top US and China officials since Joe Biden's inauguration took place with a similar tone of tension.
So, Anna, can Biden diplomatic policy be seen as a moral dispute to maintain US hegemony and thus trigger a new and strengthened Russian-Chinese partnership?
I think we have to throw back in time to understand why it is quite obvious that Biden is so committed to maintain US hegemony, and why does that represent a direct tension with Russia. So we all know that these two superpowers differ a lot in their ideology since almost ever, and that throughout decades they have been ideologically and geopolitically struggling for global influence. The Cold War is just a great example of when the tension got really serious. So this to say that the tension has always been there for many reasons, from their different ideologies to their both ambition to have a clear influence on the global world. The thing is that this tension gets more serious, for example, when conflicts within other countries are involved, just as the Ukrainian example and the Syrian one, where both countries tend to defend opposite sides and so go on opposite directions. Also, when they see their military power threatened by one another, this can be also a great source of tension between them. Nowadays, with the election of US President Joe Biden, a new increase in this tension has risen, as he has already declared that he will not hesitate to take action and so raise costs on what he considers to be aggressive actions from Russia, just as the interference in the US elections and the cyber attacks that he considered to be with the intention to disrupt democracy. And he made all of these declarations in a speech that calls a lot for his ambition to put America first, and making a lot of use of diplomacy as US foreign policy. Furthermore, more recently, reports of Russian troops massing near the Ukrainian border and in Crimea were considered credible by US, letting so them require explanations from Russia, as they, along with NATO, support a lot the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Not to mention the offenses expressed and exchanged between the two leaders of these two countries, with Biden calling Putin a murderer and obviously Putin retailing back. Not to forget that Biden is also very committed in strengthened the alliances that Biden has weakened, and for that he has already, for example, rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement and re-engaged with the World Health Organization. However, in an opposite side, in what comes to China, he has already made very clear that US will actually confront what he considers to be economic abuses and attacks on human rights, intellectual property and global governance from China. So I think we can see that US president is clearly making serious positions about his against his two main rivals in what comes to international trade and military matters, China and Russia. So that America can stand out, which seems to me that we may be approaching a bipolar world again, with Russia and China in one side and their alliances, and America in the other side with its alliances. The one thing that I'm sure about regarding all this tension is that we aren't going to have a nuclear war because of the mutual destruction hypothesis that we all know about. However, this clearer and clearer separation can still become very prejudicial to the whole world, as these two superpowers have a great influence on other countries, and so the sanctions applied between them and their attempts to prevail can really hurt the economies and the stability of the countries caught up in the middle. And I think the last thing that we need now is another conflict, another crisis that this time we can control, because the pandemic we couldn't. So, answering straightforward to the question, I think it's quite probable that China and Russia will strengthen their relations so that they can better deal with the sanctions threatened by America to both of these countries.
So thank you all for watching. Also thank you to our amazing guests that we are here today. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and to subscribe our YouTube channel as Nova Economics Club, and follow the podcast Connected on Spotify, and see you next month. Stay connected.